Hi, this is Bob Sorrentino from Italian Roots and Genealogy, and I'm here today with Karen Haid, who's the author of the book Calabria, The Other Italy. And she's got some fabulous stories in that book that I can't wait to ask her about. So, welcome, Karen. Thanks for being here.
Hi,
So,
thank you very
the most
much.
obvious question I have to ask you is Haid is not an Italian name. So, do you have any Italian roots or did you just teach in Italy?
Yes, you're right. I don't have any Italian roots. Well, not that I know of, because I haven't done the DNA test. So who knows? Perhaps it's in there somewhere. One never knows. But no, my roots are mostly German, some English that I know of. But I always had an affinity for Italy because my parents actually lived there in the 1950s. So they both learned Italian, and so we ate a lot of Italian food. And actually, one of my sisters thought we were Italian. You know, we had a Neapolitan presepe, the nativity scene at Christmas in the living room, and we would have lasagna or baked ziti for Christmas, kind of thing. So I always had this affinity for Italy. So I decided to learn the language, and then I wanted to have a more intensive experience. And so after having spent numerous times at intensive language schools for about a month at a time, where you just all you do is speak the language, so you don't get it confused with English, and so you start to really think in the language. I decided that I would like to live there for a certain time, and as just so happens, I landed in Calabria, in the toe of the boot.
So that's fascinating. So, um, how come your mom and dad lived in Italy back then?
My father went to school. He went to La Sapienza University, and then my mother worked for Coca-Cola while she was living there, while they were living there. So
Ah, that's pretty cool. And I guess Coca Cola sounds the same in an Italian and an American.
Coca-Cola, unless you're in Florence, in that area, and when their dialect is like Coca-Cola.
Really? Ah, that's so funny. Now, that's interesting because that's almost like a Spanish type of dialect when you say it like that, in a certain sense, which probably would make sense because the Spanish were there for so many years all throughout Italy. Um, so I found the book fascinating, and just two quick things about Calabria. Um, when I started my research, I had no idea that I had any Calabrian roots at all. I knew mom was from Puglia, Torito, and dad's family was from Naples. Um, and I did not know that my third and beyond that great grandfathers came from Montebello and was actually my third great grandfather was Count Giacomo of Montebello. And not that they lived there that much from what I've seen. It turned out more to be a summer place because all the nobles seemed to live in Naples, at least from the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. So that's one thing. Um, and the second thing is, I did not realize, again, because I grew up mostly with the Naples in the body, that so many people from the United States, in the United States, that came from Italy, came from Calabria. And that's when I put out posts, that seems to Calabria seems to get the most hits.
Well, it's a good size. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, it's a good size region. It's, of course, it's not as big as Sicily, but today 2 million people live there, and probably many more people with Calabrian roots, of course, live all over the world. So it's a good size region, and really, up until recently, there hasn't been as much written about it. So people who have roots there, um, when you put something out about Calabria, of course, they want to know, because everyone talks about Sicily. Not just people who have Sicilian roots, but a region like Calabria, much less so.
Right. And then going through the book, I was astonished to find that it seems to be extremely rural, much more so than probably a lot of the other regions.
Um, I guess I would say yes and no. There, um, There are also many cities along the coasts. So when you look at a city like Reggio Calabria, which is right at the point of the boot that looks across the Strait of Messina, which is only 2 miles wide at its narrowest point. So it's right there. It's a neighbor. Um, so that's a big city. And well, big city, by Italian standards, 185,000 people, 250,000 people in including the suburbs. But that's a pretty good size town, city, and people have been going through Reggio Calabria, or Regium, way back when in Roman and Greek times for thousands of years because it's right on there across from Messina. So there are several of these larger cities. And then, as you say, there are so many of the rural areas because there are mountains throughout the whole region. So while Calabria is surrounded by 500 miles of coastline, you think about that, that is really incredible. There are mountains that separate everyone from one side to the other. And so a lot of the people and a lot of the people who came to the United States came from a lot of these smaller places in the mountains. And there, of course, are a lot of rural, still sort of untouched type places, which makes it a great place to visit because, you're not elbow to elbow um, trying to see something or just enjoy the scenery.
Right. And I know, a lot of people that have done the DNA test, and you should do it. It's a lot of fun. But a lot of people who have done it, especially us Italians who claim to be 100% Italian and find out that they have Greek in them. How did I get Greek? I'm not Greek, I'm Italian. But very, very strong influence, Greek influence in not only Sicily, of course, we know that, but also in Calabria.
Yes, yes, definitely. Well, first, of course, the Greeks were there, 700 BC, settling in many of the cities that places on the coast that are cities and towns today. Um, and but then later on, the Byzantines came, so lots of priests came to these hills and little mountain places and lived in caves, and then full-blown churches developed from that. And so there's this Greek history that's continuous for a couple thousand years. Also, in many of the villages, way back when, many villages spoke a Greek dialect. So they were more or less speaking an ancient Greek. Now, only a handful of them still have that language, and most of them have lost it and speak more of a Latin dialect, a Romance language dialect. But many previously, even like 200 years ago, the people would have been speaking this ancient Greek language.
Wow, that's very interesting. And I know, like any good book about Italy, it's layered with food. So now, do those recipes um, in these towns, do they still hold a lot of that Greek influence?
Well, for example, you'll see goat meat on menus in small little trattorias and little agriturismo places. You'll see goat meat. Of course, there's always the historic cheese. Pecorino is more common. Well, a lot all over the South, but definitely in Calabria. And so, but I mean, a lot of these type recipes that we think are Italian have had roots thousands of years ago. Or the use of the figs um, and other uh, those type of recipes are ancient.
Yeah, no, yeah, no, and I guess that makes sense. Those traditions, especially there, I guess, they linger on. Um, yeah, I mean, I love to cook. I do all the cook. So I was fascinated by all the foods and the different foods, and the one that struck me, and I don't I know begins with an S. I can't remember the exact name, and I'm terrible in Italian anyway. But the fish that they made, I don't know, like 10 different ways for you.
Yeah, the pesce stocco. Yeah, pesce stocco, they would just say stocco, which is the cod, the dried cod. A little bit like the bacala is the one that is the salted dried cod that you see often. The pesce stocco is air dried. So it's all Norwegian cod that historically been cooked. And with the dried fish, of course, they had to reconstitute it. And certain towns are very proud because they say they have the best water, and so theirs is better than the next town. Um, and but yes, the pesce stocco, particularly in the south of Calabria, is a very important dish that they eat on Fridays and of course all holidays.
No, it seemed that way, and yeah, it was just so funny to see you describe how many different ways they made it in one meal.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so is so with that, is there a regional dishes in Calabria that besides that everybody would say, well, that's typical Calabrian.
Um, yeah, that's it's interesting to say that question because often you know how in the United States we look at Italian food and we say no matter what it is, it's Italian food, but it might have originally come from a specific region. Like we all love cannoli, and people talk about oh how they had the so-called the best cannoli in Torino, and is that possible? Of course, of course, it would not be possible. Asking a Sicilian, um, so. Is the same thing even when you look at a region like Calabria and you go from the very north to the south. There are different foods that are more common. So, for example, when people think of Calabria, often they think of the peperoncino, and that is a product that Calabria is known for all over Italy. So when people think of peperoncino, they think of Calabria. There is one area in Calabria that has the best peperoncino. That's around the area of Diamante, which is in the northwest of the region. They even have a peperoncino festival every year. But the peperoncino is used, of course, throughout the region, and so often people think of Calabrian food as spicy. Um, of course, it is spicy, and just like anywhere else, there are some people who don't eat anything spicy, and some people eat things very hot. So everyone has their tastes. But there is a sausage called the Nunduya sausage. It's spelled apostrophe Nduga, and that sausage, well, it's really a salami technically, and it's spreadable, and it's very very spicy. And so you see that often on menus, and they'll call it a Calabrian sausage or this Nduja sausage. But originally, that came from a small village on Capo Vaticano, which is about in the middle of the region, and Spilinga is the name of the village. But now it's known everywhere, and so often if you order a pizza calabrese when you're in Calabria, it will often have that Nduja salami with tropea onions, because that's another food that is from the area of Tropea. It's a red sweet onion, and it's known throughout Italy, the tropea onion. Um, but originally, of course, it came from that area, that one area. And then another product is the bergamot, and that's something a lot of people are surprised about. Is that the bergamot, which we're most familiar with the bergamot in tea, Earl Grey tea, but it actually comes from most of the bergamot on the world stage comes from a very small area around Reggio Calabria. And so they use it in the tea, but it's also mostly used in perfume. Historically, in that area, people did use it in cakes and all kinds of things. If you went to the north of the region 100 years ago, you probably wouldn't have seen it. But today, of course, they market their products anywhere, anywhere they can. But that's historically from the area of Reggio Calabria, and it was and still is a very, very important agricultural product for the region. Also, licorice. They have a very good natural licorice that they have been harvesting, and they managed to find a way to turn it into little licorice candies, et cetera, et cetera. And and that tends to be more in the northeast of the region around the town of Rossano. So there's so many different products. Of course, oranges, olive oil. Um, they make the traditional salamis and sausages like you find in throughout South Italy. But the food is very good in Calabria, and it's known for having good food in Italy. So Italians, when they think of Calabria, they think of good food. Si mangia bene in Calabria. One eats well uh, in Calabria. So,
Right. So one eats well, but I got the impression that traveling well is tough.
well, you need a car for a lot of to go to a lot of places. The trains are not to the same level as in other parts of the country. It's definitely an area that's been neglected with that regard. There historically people would refer to Calabria as the third island, even though it's attached. But Sicily, um, Sardinia, Sardinia, and Calabria. So, because of the mountains. And so, but now there really is quite a nice highway that goes, down from um, Naples, and it's really quite good for most of the way.
Yeah, I got the impression that the trains. And it was funny because you mentioned it because I live in New Jersey. Um, maybe they're either a step above or a step below New Jersey Transit. I'm not sure which on any given day. But New Jersey Transit has the habit of just not showing up sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, and the delays and et cetera, et cetera. But also, a lot of the tracks are single tracks, so or most of the tracks are single tracks. So yeah, so if something happens anywhere on the line, nobody goes anywhere.
Yeah, well, that's no different than New Jersey Transit. They tell you the train's coming, but they don't tell you it's not the train you were expecting. It's the one after that. The other thing I thought was pretty amusing, and I lived in England for a couple of years, so I kind of know the post office with the stamps. Every time you did anything, the guy would come out and stamp your paper 47 times, and you don't know why. Um, but I thought that and apparently it's not just again I guess I get the same in England because you got your TV license there and all that. It's not just the post office; it's there. It's other official documents and things that you need. Yeah.
There's a lot of bureaucracy, and anything that people do, or there's, as you say, so many stamps are brought into play, and it's a timbro is what they call it. And you learn the word for that pretty early on because you need a stamp for that. So you need to get that, yeah. And they'll have all these copies. Um, yeah, and you think, are they really going to file them away in different drawers? But it makes things difficult for the Italians themselves when they want to do anything that has to do with the government or file papers for something. Um, it makes it difficult for them. And
Yeah, and I have a friend from grammar school. It's almost well, I guess about a year and a half. She moved to Salerno. She lives there, um, and yeah, it was a similar kind of thing when she finally got her passport and her residency. She said, she was supposed to go register with the police or something like that, and they told her, well, the police may come to your door and knock on your door to see if you actually live there, or they may ring the bell and try to talk to you through the intercom or something like that. And then she got panicky because 2 weeks went by and no police showed up. So she went to the police station and said, no police came. And they said, "That's fine. You're okay." So she was, yeah, she was kind of upset, but she's got her citizenship and her passport and everything now. So she's quite happy finally. Long journey. So, and I know I'll butcher it, but I want to ask you about one town you went to. Is it Pendiatillo? Am I saying it right?
Pentidattilo.
Pentidatilo, right?
Yeah, because pente like five and dattilo um, fingers. So it means five fingers.
Right, which is right near Montebello, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, 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 right next door.
And my my great grandfather's card, actually their coat of arms actually has three mountains on it and then a lion on top. So it's very interesting. And one of my cousins told me that's the mountains, and from there.
Well, there are three uh, major mountains and parks in Calabria: the Aspromonte in the south, then the Sila in the middle, and the Pollino in the north. And some of the mountains are quite high, over 7,000 feet. There's skiing, but so in the south, where your uh, family was from, was would be the Aspromonte Mountains. That's probably what it would have represented if it was on the card. But Pentidatilo is interesting because of it really looked like back in the day five fingers, and so you can just imagine even today when we see a mountain that resembles something, we name it, and it's a landmark, and it somehow develops an importance. And the same thing with Pentidatilo, but of course through earthquakes and mudslides, etc. It doesn't have quite the five fingers that it must most likely had thousands of years ago when the Greeks looked up and named it.
Yeah, and we were supposed to be there in April. I'm hoping now we're going to be able to go in May. We because we there's still a home there that was Palazzo Piramalo, or Torre Piramalo, um, that was owned by my third great grandfather, and they sold it in the early 1900s, and now it's pretty much in disarray. I wish we could buy it,
Yeah.
um, although it probably cost a fortune to restore it. So you have all of these little towns, and I know you've visited many of them. What are the biggest differences as you travel around Calabria into these towns? Is it the dress? Is it the food? Is it you know the dialects? What are the biggest differences because they're so separate?
Well, I mean, today everybody watches TV. So the people in the towns, even the ones that are very, very old, who lived through so many so many things, who grew up milking the goat in the street and having a donkey. Even those people watch modern TV, um, buy in contemporary in modern grocery stores. So there really aren't the differences that you would have seen, let's say, even 30, 40, 50 years ago between the people themselves. People, it's rare to see someone in a costume. And the only time that you would see that would be during a festival. So, and really in the south of the region, you might see it if it's a dance group, for example, a folk dance group wearing costumes. Um, there's also an Albanian community, several Albanian communities in the northern part. And when you hear that, you think, oh, there are people who came over on boats recently. Not the case. People who have been there for 400 or 500 years, and and so they're completely Italian, but their dialect actually is an ancient Albanian. So there are many of these towns also in the very north. And in a few of them, you will see some costumes come out during a festival. Um, But as far as and then I mean, of course, small differences in foods. This village makes something this way; they call it this or that. Could be exactly the same um, item that they call it might have 20 different names throughout the region. The same for the same sort of cookie. um, but so you don't see the kind of differences that you would have read about in a book from 100 years ago, how they saw the villagers coming down in this. No, they're going to be all dressed just like we are.
That's sad in a way.
Yes, it's yeah.
Not to say that they shouldn't be modern, but it's just,
No, I mean, yes, you will see some little old women in black outfits. There's no question. You can still see that. I don't know for how many more years that you'll be able to see that. Matter of fact, just recently they they made this promo spot for Italy. It was a short film of 8 minutes. 2 of the minutes were credits that the everyone likes to point out, and it was some well-known director who made it, and they used Raul Bova, that's a famous Calabrian actor, and the people were up in arms because they they pictured the local people like the little old men with the cap and the suspenders, and they said, What do they think we are? W- we're modern people. We're in the contemporary side, just like everybody else. We're proud of our fashion. Um, a matter of fact, Versace, for example, is from Reggio Calabria. Yeah. So, yeah. and, and so, yeah, the idea of the backward um, image really offended Calabrians to the point that people had to apologize on national levels um, for depicting them in such a way. So, yeah,
wow, that's something. Yeah. Wow. No, I could say, I mean, look, we still have some of that going on in this country, right? So, um, so, what advice would you give to anybody who wants to go to Calabria, but specifically people that have Calabrian roots that want to make a trip there? Hopefully, we'll be getting this vaccine soon and we'll all be able to travel again and things will go back to.
right. Yeah. Well, I think in the past, a lot of people had said, uh, Calabria, why go there? There's nothing there. That was sort of the general impression. Of course, you go to Rome, you go to Florence, you go to Venice, the Amalfi Coast, and those were the places to see. You go to Sicily. Um, Now Puglia is sort of coming up as sort of the next place to go. Um, and people, I think they thought, oh, I just go to the village where my roots were, and that's basically all that there is in Calabria, and then I'll see the rest of Italy. Or many people have already seen, by the time they get to Calabria, they've usually seen half of Italy. um, that's usually the last place on their stop, even if their roots are there, because in their mind, I think that they just think that that's all there is, because there really hasn't been much publicity about the region, not much written about it. So the first thing I would say is that they need to really read and look and see what's there. And I think that they would be amazed at how much there is to see. How many, for example, how many wonderful museums there are. If somebody is into museums, for example, in Reggio Calabria, they have a wonderful archaeological museum, amongst the best in the country. And just their sort of crowning glory of the museum are these two bronze statues from 500 BC. They're called the Bronzi di Riace because they came from offshore of a little town called Riace on the Ionian Sea, not far from where your people were from. And uh, they are just so incredible to see. um, I'm not going to say that they're, let's just say they definitely compete with Michelangelo's David. You know, they're at that level, and and so people, if they don't know about that, they might just not even stop. And so, like I say, there's so many things to see. There are the coastline, as I mentioned. There's 500 miles of coastline, and the views are, some are just spectacular. Tropea is becoming more famous now. It's even open in the winter. So even 10 years ago, it would be deserted. Now, Christmas lights, and they're ready for visitors. But there are, like I say, many beautiful places along the coastline, of course, in the mountains. There's a lot also to see, as far as when you say, when people want to go and learn about the history of their family, there are still some artisans working in crafts, for example, in ceramics. I know you had someone on one of your podcasts a month or so ago who talked about Seminara. He went to, and he did see that there were ceramics. He visited a ceramics shop, because when you go there, you realize, oh, look at this, all these ceramic shops. But to know that this is an historic ceramic center, and nearby there's also a museum that has some of the historic pieces in it. Um, just to give one example, there are several of these ceramic places. Um, there's also an artist working in textiles in San Giovanni in Fiore, which is a mountain town in the Sila Mountains, that does amazing work, and on a level of a world stage, his artistry. So, and he's continuing a craft that his parents did, and that people had historically done in that town. So there, like I say, are many things like this to see. Of course, beautiful churches, and then the food, as you mentioned, really, with the food and a nice view. But like I say, there's even more than food and a nice view. Um, so there's also outdoor activities if people like to hike. They just made of course, there have always been hiking paths that as much as anyone wanted, but now there's an official path that you can even get stamps in a little booklet to say that you've done it, that hikes across Calabria. So, because at certain points it's very narrow. That one, I think it's 55 kilometers. The narrowest point's even a little narrower than that. But that hike is 55 kilometers, and so you can go through the mountains and get stamps. And so they've made an official path.
Oh, so that's fun. Um, so um, so the name of the book is Calabria, the other Italy. Where can people find it?
Um, Yes, I thought I would have a copy like right here, right? Um, no, it is really, it's very easy to find. If you just type it into the internet, it'll come up. Um, on Amazon or Barnes and Noble. It won't be in the store, but you can order it through them. It's in paperback and also in Kindle or ebook versions. So you can get it from me. Also, I have a blog that has the same name, Calabria, the Other Italy. My website is calabriatheotheritaly.com. And I have over 100 blog posts just about Calabria. So everything from, for example, visiting Reggio Calabria, all the things to do there, to specific museums, um, so just lots of different blog posts, as you can imagine, 100, over 100, just about Calabria. So I think if you're going to have a decide that you're going to go to Calabria, you should do a little bit of research first, and then you also might have more of an idea um, to decide where you want to go. For example, if you're from the south, you say, "Oh, maybe I want to focus in on this area or that area." It's a very big region, and so it can take a long time if you wanted to actually see the whole thing. Um, but I do think, and I hope you got that feeling that my book gives a good impression, and because my intention was to give a good impression of the whole region, so that someone could really have a feel for the region when they read the book, and to know what's there. Of course, it was hard to include everything. Um, at a certain point, you just have to stop and say, that's it, and that's why I started the blog, to try to continue to include everything as.
Yeah, and for for anybody watching or listening, you do certainly get that flavor from reading the book, and you go into specific towns and things like that. So it is extremely interesting. Again, for whether you're Calabria and not able to get there, or whether you're planning on going there, it's definitely a good read, and we'll post the blog and everything so people can find it. Well, thanks again, Karen. I appreciate you taking the time. This has been fabulous. I love doing these types of things.
Nice talking to you.
And you got to do that DNA so we can find out how much Italian you have in you.
I know, you never know.